High on a lonely hill, where winds whispered through crooked chimneys and the grass swayed like a restless sea, stood a tiny cottage. Its walls were faded with age, its single window had frames cracked like old bone, and the door trembled every time the wind touched it. Yet for all its crookedness, the cottage felt warm and full of life. Inside lived a little girl named Mira and her beloved grandmother. Mira's parents had passed away when she was small, and the old woman had raised her with patience, kindness, and stories older than the hills themselves. But now the grandmother was growing weak. Her steps faltered, her hands trembled, and even the simplest chores tired her. Still, she never complained. One bright morning, when the sun had just begun to warm the hilltop, the grandmother spoke gently. "My dear Mira," she said, "could you go into the forest and gather some berries? A few raspberries and strawberries would be enough. I'd like to make fruit dumplings for supper." Mira's eyes lit up. She loved helping her grandmother in any way she could. She tied a kerchief around her hair, grabbed her little woven basket, and set off along the narrow path that led down from the hill and into the forest. At first, the forest greeted her cheerfully. Sunbeams filtered through fresh green leaves, painting golden patches on the mossy ground. Birds chattered happily above, and the earthy scent of damp soil and pine needles filled the air. Mira found berries quickly, clusters of red raspberries glowing like hidden jewels among the bushes. She plucked them carefully, humming to herself. But as she wandered deeper in search of strawberries, she slowly stopped paying attention to where she was stepping. The berry bushes thickened, the trees pressed closer together. The joyful sunlight dimmed, replaced by a colder, deeper shade. Mira glanced around and realized that she no longer recognized the path. Every direction looked the same: dense shrubs, towering trunks, and tangled roots. Trying to stay calm, Mira pushed forward, believing she could find her way if she just kept moving. But the brambles caught at her skirt, scratched her arms, and tugged her basket. Shadows grew longer, stretching between the trees like dark fingers. The air cooled sharply as evening crept in. Soon the forest seemed to swallow sound itself. Even the birds had stopped singing. Then, through the thickening dusk, Mira heard something strange, a rhythmic, dragging sound followed by a crackling mutter. She froze. A faint glimmer of light appeared ahead, swaying like a tiny firefly. As it drew nearer, Mira saw it clearly. It was a lantern, its flame sputtering as though struggling for breath. And behind the lantern shuffled a figure, an old woman, or something that looked like one. Her clothes were little more than tatters, rags hanging loosely from her hunched frame. One of her legs bent unnaturally, and she dragged it behind her with every step, scraping it against stones and roots. Her hair hung in wild gray clumps around her face. The lantern flickered, lighting her features only in brief flashes: sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, lips twisted into a scowl. Mira's breath caught in her throat. This must be the Dusk Hag, the creature from her grandmother's warnings. The one said to roam the forest after sundown, seeking children who stayed outside too late. The hag muttered darkly to herself as she moved. "Blackest night, foolish wanderers, I'll take them all, every last one." Her voice croaked like a raven's. She swung her head from side to side in quick, unsettling motions, her eyes darting into the undergrowth. They glinted horribly in the weak lantern light, sharp and hungry. Every few steps she spat harsh words into the air. Speaking of children, she would stuff into her sack and carry away. Mira backed into a bush, hardly daring to breathe. Her heart hammered in her ears. She tightened her grip on her basket, wishing desperately that she was back in the warm, safe cottage on the hill. The hag came closer. Closer, so close that Mira could smell the bitter, musty odor clinging to her ragged clothes. Then suddenly, the hag stumbled. Her crooked foot caught on a sharp stone jutting from the path. She shrieked angrily, the lantern swinging wildly in her hand, nearly going out. A vicious string of curses erupted from her mouth, echoing through the trees like a wicked chant. Mira squeezed her eyes shut, terrified the hag would see her. But the Dusk Hag straightened, or as much as her twisted back allowed, and continued down the path, muttering louder than before. As she limped past Mira's hiding place, she didn't stop, didn't turn her head, didn't seem to sense her at all. Her lantern flickered once more and then gradually disappeared around a bend in the path. Silence returned. Mira waited until her knees stopped shaking. Then, gathering all her courage, she ran through brambles, thorns tearing at her skirt, branches catching her hair. She didn't stop until she stumbled onto a familiar patch of ground, one she remembered passing that morning. Moments later, she burst from the forest, breathless and trembling. The last rays of the sun glowed behind the hill, and her grandmother's cottage stood ahead, warm light spilling from its little window. Her grandmother met her at the door, worry etched across her tired face. Mira threw herself into the old woman's arms, sobbing with relief. When she finally calmed down, she told her everything. "Grandma, I think I saw the Dusk Hag. I was so frightened. But it cannot have been her. If it was, she would have taken me." The grandmother listened without interrupting. Her gaze grew deep and thoughtful. At last she spoke, her voice low and steady. "My child, it was the Dusk Hag. There is no mistaking her. I once saw her myself when I was just your age." She took Mira's hands gently. "But remember this. Even the Dusk Hag has no power over a good-hearted person who is out after dark for a noble reason. You ventured into the forest to help me, not out of mischief or disobedience. Goodness protects those who carry it with them." Mira blinked, surprised. "So, she couldn't take me because I was helping you?" "Yes," the grandmother nodded. "Your heart was filled with kindness. And where true kindness lives, even the darkest creatures cannot claim their hold. But do not treat this lightly." Her voice softened. "Let your goodness stay with you always. It is your strongest protection." That night, Mira fell asleep beneath her grandmother's quilt, comforted by the crackling fire and the old woman's gentle breathing. The forest still lay outside, dark, mysterious, filled with all manner of things. But Mira knew now that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing kindness, even in the shadows. And that, her grandmother said, was a magic older than any creature that roamed the dusk.